All right, we're continuing with the second part of the Hinduism reading from the Huston Smith World Religions book, and then we're also going to be discussing the first Upanishad, the Isha Upanishad. And so I just wanted to open with this quote from the Smith book, which caught my attention. By the way, it's page 40. If you want to sort of follow along, it's the right hand column, the first full paragraph. It says the answer to that. I'm sorry. Maybe I should actually read the question. Yeah. The question they forthrightly raise is old age worthwhile? So the context is in the stages of life section of the reading. So is old age worthwhile? The answer to that question, this is the part that I'm going to focus on, depends on what we think we are. If we are basically bodies, nothing can compare with sensory pleasures. If we are personalities, personal achievements will fulfill us most. But if we are spirits, nothing can rival the excitement of discovering the awe-inspiring unknown world within. Because India took our spirituality seriously, she looked forward to life's second half, staking it out as a time for one's true adult education. I thought it was interesting just in terms of um, I like the approach of if your theory about yourself is this, then this will ultimately be its telos. This will be its either its reward or its goal or what it wants, right? So, and you can see that too, right, in terms of our world, right? If we are just bodies, if we are just a nervous system that wants to that is suppresses pain in favor of pleasure, then pleasure is the highest goal. If we are personalities, right? Then this is the particular goal. And I just thought it was interesting. It was like, hey, if you're open, yeah, if your opening move is well, actually at core we are spiritual, then the ultimate fulfillment is going to be something that is of a spiritual nature, you know. So it goes back down to, or it makes me think of sort of the importance of getting your philosophical anthropology right in order to know where one ought to go, you know. So I thought that was yeah, I thought that sort of just struck me as a sort of a bold statement, but also true, right? How do you view yourself? Well, if you view yourself X, then you're going to want Y. Well, if you view yourself in a different way, so yeah, actually, you're right. You're right. So, so there you go. Now we left off on Raja Yoga, the royal road to integration, and there was a lot here, and we had already consumed our hour and some. Um, what I thought was interesting about this is just obviously this is one of the other uh, paths, as it were, right? Or the last path that Houston Smith brings up. What I thought was interesting about this was especially their notion of the self. Um, uh, I'm looking at my notes, so I don't know exactly where in the reading it is, but it gives a theory of the self that was fourfold, and that we are a body, and that we are a mind, and by mind, Smith was talking about our conscious self, right? But then we go down a little bit lower and we get the subconscious, and he says, what do we find in our subconscious? Ultimately, deposits of our individual histories. Okay, and I would imagine that all comes out right in in a variety of ways, but certainly in the dream state, right? Sort of like things we're not thinking about from in the waking state, and then all of a sudden conscious mind gets to rest, and then all of this crazy stuff from our past, etc., comes out in the dream state. And then at the deepest level is being itself. And I actually, by the way, I've been reading this as well as an aside. Is this backwards to you? No, I don't know. Good. This was recommended by David Bentley Hart, um, who's has a who's warm, very warm to the Indian tradition. And in this one, it sort of described being itself, this sort of last layer, with different terms which I thought to share. The infinite, the eternal, uh, ultimate consciousness, ultimate meaning the final, the transcendental state. So that's different ways of, because when we're dealing with this sort of rock bottom, what is this thing, which will come up when we discuss sort of the theology of Hinduism, which was also in this section, right? What do we mean by God, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think it's helpful to have different terms in order to grasp it,
Sure.
to grasp the ungraspable,
Yeah.
as it were. Um, so I liked the breakdown of the individual, right, in terms of these four layers. And what it seems too is that the steps that the yogi takes in the Raja Yogi is ultimately to move through those layers,
Yeah.
right? Because they discuss, and you can take it from here, but they talk about sort of the 8 different steps of arriving at the insight of one's true self.
Yeah. And so the first
Oh,
two
okay.
are the ones that they say are common across all of the different paths.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned this last time that I found it
Yeah.
interesting that they mentioned that in this section, which was after all of the others.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, the first two are about the moral preliminaries common to all,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's those different abstentions, the five abstentions,
Mm-hmm.
which is from
Mm-hmm.
injury, lying, stealing, sensuality, and greed. And then
Right.
step two is the five observances of cleanliness,
Mm-hmm.
contentment, self-control, studiousness, and contemplation of the divine.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it says that those two are like common like prerequisites for all four
Mm-hmm.
paths. But those are the first
Yeah.
two steps that they mentioned specifically for the Raja path.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then the
Yeah.
third, oh
Yeah.
yeah, go for
And
it.
I guess real quickly, it's sort of interesting because I mean, and we're going to talk about this obviously over the course of all these different religions. Um, but I wonder what the rationale is, especially with the metaphysics that we're getting from the Hindu tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what what's the rationale for the abstentions? In other words, it's easy to say, well, of course you shouldn't injure somebody else, of course you shouldn't lie, but like what do those things do to get in the way of the ultimate realization?
Yeah, it's a good question.
You know,
Um,
I mean, sensuality and greed makes sense because with if I'm just after pleasure, then that is reinforcing a false notion of a small self, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. In other words, like and I'm not just this thing here, right? I am something according to the Hindu tradition, I'm something far greater, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am Brahman itself. So I guess by pursuing a life of pleasure, you're just ultimately it's reinforcing ego. Let's put it that way. Ego is probably a
Yeah.
better way of putting it, right? And this atomized individual. Greed probably in the same way, right? Because it's constantly I, me, my, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 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 you're bigger than that. But the other ones are sort of interesting, like
Well, do you think stealing would also?
well, it could be the case that all of them are self-oriented in
Yeah.
some way, you know,
Injury is
because
interesting. Is that, do you like, what do you think that entails? Like,
I was sort of thinking like injury again, like harming someone,
yeah.
like
Mm-hmm.
or either psychologically or physically. Um,
That's what I was thinking at first. It just
yeah,
says injury though, so
I mean,
like
yeah,
protecting
lying. I think
yourself from
stealing
injury.
stealing sort of gets into the greed thing, right? Right.
Yeah.
I want this, and
Mm-hmm.
there's dishonesty in it. Um, lying also seems a form of self-preservation,
Yeah.
right? So
Hmm.
there's the self gets reinforced there. Um, and then I guess my injury would be something like, where you're maybe it all comes back to self, right? Like you're intentionally harming another, for selfish reasons, something along those lines.
Yeah, it's also, I feel like that's also in line with some like a self-control, which is an observance in step two.
Mm,
Like if
mm-hmm.
you, it's like, why are you injuring someone else? You know, it's like,
Yeah,
do you have control over what you're doing?
yeah.
Um, like, are you actually thinking about about it?
True. No, 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 no.
But
That's good.
if,
Almost sort of like lashing out,
yeah, yeah,
right?
hmm,
You know. Or also, here's another one too, is that in injury. So let's talk about like basically it would be injury or harm. Let's say harm that is unnecessary, right?
yeah,
Right. So this is not like punishing a criminal, sentencing them, which is a type of harm, right?
hmm,
You're taking their freedom away. That might be justified. But we're talking about situations where it's not justified. And in that case, you could maybe add another component of the metaphysic that you are not recognizing the divine within that person.
yeah, right. Like you are belittling who they are,
Hmm. Hmm.
which,
Right.
and I almost think maybe like there's an aspect of injury. I don't know. I was gonna say like injury can prevent you from getting through the next steps,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
of yourself, and so you wouldn't want to apply that to
Hmm.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Or maybe it would just make it more difficult. Um, yeah. So I mean, I feel like injury kind of comes down to the golden rule.
Right.
So I
Right.
don't know.
Right. But
I
it's
don't know
sort
if
of
that's
interesting to
there.
think about.
Hmm.
It's sort of interesting to think about like what when we talk about these moral principles, it's very easy because um they're 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 so ensconced in our thinking and our cultures and our upbringing of just sort of like, well, that's just obviously wrong.
Right.
But it's interesting. What's the rationale? How is that connected to the larger system?
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, an example from the Judeo-Christian tradition would be something along the lines of, I have the um, Imagio Dei, right, the image of God in me as by virtue of being created by God, right? We have
Hmm.
this image of God, and whatever that fully means, at least one thing it means is that I am deserving of respect, right? And you are deserving of respect because you have that imprint on you. So, um, so therefore, you could look at the Ten Commandments in many ways as a violation of the image of God in the other,
Right. Hmm.
not just as an arbitrary rule that
Yeah.
that God's decided to make,
Yeah. And
right?
I
So
wonder.
if I'm stealing from you, I'm not respecting
Mhm.
that the image of God in you. If I'm lying to you, I'm not respecting that piece.
Yeah, and I wonder if um, because the fourth layer is being itself, and that's
Yeah.
shared amongst people, if there's that same kind of idea of like
Hmm.
respecting being, right,
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
within others. And so you like,
Yeah.
I don't know, don't disturb like don't disturb the flow in other
I
people, essentially.
I think so. I
Hmm.
think so. And then all the observations, in some sense, are um, it's almost like they're disciplines to help you move through those four layers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Cleanliness is
Right.
interesting. Like,
Cleanliness is huge, though, man.
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like
I know.
organized
I'm just thinking
environment,
from a
organized
practical
mind.
level. If I had from a practical level in terms of just even like what this, right?
Hmm.
In your house, if things are not in order,
Hmm.
right? It disturbs you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had this too, and I can go in one of the kids' rooms, and actually I'll avoid some of them because I know it's a mess.
Hmm.
And then I want the living spaces to be as clean as possible. I mean, there's something about it, that it can. I mean, cleanliness, I understand. can also deal with sort of just basic hygiene. But even
Right.
when you tend to it, there is a feeling of um, sort of the yeah, well, I don't know, I guess there is some contentment in it. I mean, I think there's become the joy can ultimately result from cleanliness.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
you know, I have taken my shower. I am clean. I do not feel grimy. The place is in order. The dishes are clean. The sink is not full. It's sort of like
Yeah.
almost taking care of the clutter.
Yeah, and it removes mental clutter because you're not thinking about, oh, I feel dirty or I need to like take
Totally.
a shower or wait, there's these
Yeah.
things that I want to do. So it helps make that aspect easier.
Yeah. If your
Um,
place is in order,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I would say it's the space then becomes more conducive for you to reach level 4.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't have things in the way, sort of blockading you. Um,
Self-control, I feel like is kind of obvious.
yeah, yeah,
Contentment is
because
interesting.
you know,
Go for it.
yeah, no, I think with self-control, I think it is obvious. I mean, obviously, it's going to be crucial to well, these exercises, right? I mean, I have to.
Yeah.
Actually, it's going to be crucial when it comes to the Raja Yoga because um, at some point you are going to need to focus on an object,
Hmm.
and when you're in meditation, and that's a lot of self-control.
I feel like
Um,
each of the remaining eight steps are like
Deal with
require
that.
one level more of self-control. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
hmm and
Oh,
patience.
entirely.
I don't know if
Entirely.
patience is mentioned, but like,
Yeah.
or maybe
No,
patience
you,
could be a
maybe you
part of
could wrap that up.
studiousness
Yeah. And you could
because
also maybe wrap that up in contentment too, right?
I don't know if I would put it in
No?
contentment.
Okay.
I feel like, yeah, contentment is,
Well, no,
I mean,
self-control, you're
maybe a
right.
little bit.
Patience,
Like contentment is the result of patience, I would
yes.
say.
Yeah.
But studiousness is like focusing on one thing and studying it. And I feel like if you're really
Totally.
patient, then you're being studious but not eager.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you.
Hmm.
Let's walk through the steps, shall we?
Hmm. Um,
Which, by the way, I think we should add this to our homework. I feel like we should be doing some meditation before the next session.
I don't think we'll get to
We can
step
talk.
eight, but no.
I don't think we will either.
Maybe, yeah.
We get struck by a lightning bolt. One of us will just be like, "I made it. I saw it."
Yeah, so the third
Go
one
for
is
it.
about is interested in the mind, but also with the body.
Hmm.
Um, and in this section, this is where they mentioned that India's most famous discovery is the lotus position,
Yeah.
um, which
Which can you get into? I could never get into a full
I
lotus.
can't do a full lotus. I I don't know. I feel like I could get there if I stretched for
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
month. No,
Yeah. I think I
I'm a
could do a
little
half
off.
lotus, but I'd be tilted.
Hmm. Um, yeah, so I mean, they mentioned like ideally you sit on a tiger skin symbolizing
I thought that was
energy,
interesting. Yeah.
overlaid with a deer skin symbolizing calm,
Hmm.
which is very interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if those
I
symbols
I guess
are more common.
the energy wouldn't the energy be directed at things like self-control, right?
I don't know.
Or the no no or the sorry or the ability to focus, like the energy
Hmm.
is because at some level you are going to focus on you're going to focus on something, um, and that seems to be where the energy is directed, right? Because
Yeah,
it's hard to do that.
yeah.
It's difficult to do that,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, so I would imagine that um, these symbols of energy and calm are definitely to give you the energy to focus without being bored to a
Hmm.
degree,
Yeah.
and then calm to relieve like distractions,
Yeah.
and like and to have
Yeah, and
patience to persist.
exactly, exactly. Because it's going to be it's difficult.
Yeah. Hmm.
One, it's going to be difficult to just sit, and then two, you're ultimately warring with your mind.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
you have to be patient with that process.
Yep.
I thought it was interesting. I think, did I jot this down? That's it was one thing about the breath that I thought was really interesting. I don't think I wrote the full note, but right, you're in the
Oh, I
lunge
think that's
position.
in step four. Yeah.
The body is alert, but it's relaxed. And then it
Hmm.
was the breathing that I thought was really interesting. It was an evenness of breathing and reduced.
Yeah.
So in other
Evenness
words,
and
it was
reduction.
it
Yeah.
was it was a point at which um, you get to a point at which obviously it's even, and also too your I remember this when I did yoga back in the day, and we would do like a breathing exercise at the beginning or the end, and then they would say as you're breathing, either I think it's sort of like at the top of the exhale or at the bottom of the inhale,
Hmm.
you hold it, so you're not breathing in anymore. So I had this sort of image of the reduced breathing as well, right? You're holding it before you do the next inhale. Um, and it was to the point, and this is the part I should have noted, but it was to the point in the reading where he said, you almost don't even really recognize that you're breathing. I think
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
subtle. It's so subtle. Um,
So gently
so
across the goose, um, down, down touching the nostrils that an observer cannot tell if air is moving
there you
in or
go.
out.
Yeah, yeah. Which I thought,
I don't
which
know if it's like just putting my finger by my nose. It's like you feel the warmth
right.
of an exhale and the
Yeah,
coolness of an inhale. So it's like to be able to
yeah,
do it so calmly.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
that's tough.
specifically,
Hmm.
you know,
But also,
the
it's not like you're focusing on it, right? Like you're trying, like,
well,
right?
ultimately, I probably early on the practitioner is right, and
Well, yeah,
then with training, yes, the focus is subsides.
yeah.
You know, I like the quote from the Bhagavad Gita: "The light of the lamp does not flicker in a windless place."
Hmm.
So there's the breath is that still, um, which by the way makes me think of non-agitation, right? You're doing everything in this particular situation not to agitate the process, ergo be distracted,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
You know, you're not panting, and if I'm panting, then my mind is thinking about the panting because it's loud and obvious, right?
Right.
And you're
Yeah.
trying to get into it. You're trying to get into a position here or a mode where there really aren't any distractions.
Hmm.
You know,
Well, yeah, until I think the fifth step. You do
yeah,
want distractions, kind of, but it's really about overcoming the distractions.
right, right,
Um,
right.
yeah, and the fifth one is interesting because I mean it mentions like all these different sounds, like creaking
Hmm.
doors and whatnot, but then it talks
Yes.
about what it means to hear something, and it gives an
Hmm.
example of a husband
I
and
thought
his
that was
wife.
clever.
He calls
Right,
from the other room, and then a couple minutes later she says, "Wait, I didn't hear you," or he mentions
right,
something, and
right.
it it questions who's correct, and it's like depends on how you
Mm.
define hearing. Is it
Yeah,
the
the
sound
sound waves.
waves hitting a healthy eardrum, or is it
Right.
actually hearing, like receiving
I'm
that and understanding it?
concentrating.
Yeah.
I'm concentrating. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
And it says that this step is to achieve um, that step to the extreme of controlling not hearing or controlling
Yeah,
not perceiving
un,
your usual senses that
yeah,
would distract you. So the creak, people talking in another
sure.
room,
Yeah.
the sound of
I think he
wind.
even says it's as if you're unplugging your sense
Yeah.
receptors,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's the level of concentration.
The feeling of a
I
bug
The one
walking on your
line here I
arm.
thought was brilliant, and that's where I think things like self-control become important.
Yeah. This is
Is
probably one of the biggest sections
where
for
it
that.
says the mind's fiercest antagonist is itself,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? And that's when they bring up the monkey mind, which, by the
Yeah.
way, was a different version than I told you guys when you were younger.
Yeah, a little bit.
I had to look up Saint V2's dance.
I did not look it up yet. I'll have to look it
Yeah.
up.
It's it's
Can you
actually based,
demonstrate?
it has a new name now, right? It has a new name now, but it was a condition that some young kids would have between the age of 5 and 15,
Hmm.
where they had almost like a seizure of the body,
Oh.
not the brain. So
Mm-hmm.
their limbs would move around in odd ways, but out of their control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So I personally like the scorpion, biting the scorpion better than the wasp, but that's fine. So
Yeah.
that's where this, and it's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
You're going through all of these particular layers. You're fighting against your mind. And your mind um, is playing all these tricks on you in terms of, well, you could be doing something else right now. This is boring, um, and uh, I liked the let's see, what was it? It was a couple of things. There's one quote was really good from the Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad. When all the senses are
Mm.
stilled, when the mind is at rest, when the intellect wavers not, that, say the wise, is the highest state. We're not reading it's not on the list anyway, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, but back when I was doing my sort of Eastern turn in the late uh, early 2000s, um, I was reading uh, the Yoga Sutras, and the first sutra is hold on, let me see. I know it by song because I would sing it to myself. Uh, it goes Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, and it's the first sutra. And what it basically means, I had a CD with all of them sung
Mm-hmm.
back when CDs were a thing, and it was basic. That first, it says yoga is um, the the art of stilling or calming the mind stuff, or the mind,
Mm-hmm.
or elements of the mind. So it's literally the ability to take, like, I'm thinking about the past, the present, the future, all in 1 second, right? It's the mind is this monkey mind jumping around, and the ability to try to just still it starts to get you to these deeper levels.
Right.
And it's hard,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. Um, so I also like, it was, I asterisked this and underlined it a number of times, is relax the mind to allow repressed thoughts and emotions. This was interesting, to exercise themselves, and then keep your
Sure.
mind on a focal point. So I thought that was interesting, was it was almost like you're going to be at the state where all the different thoughts are battling for your attention, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
or even. And I thought repressed was interesting too, because those are ones we don't want to think about.
Yeah.
And it was like, my sense of that line was to allow them to emerge, right? I think this is
Mm-hmm.
all part of like mindfulness training.
Yep.
Allow them to emerge, live with them for a little bit, and then after a while they will either resolve themselves and or remove themselves to clarify, or to enable you to find your focal point,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I
Yeah.
actually remember too from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it's all these little sutras. It would just be a line in Sanskrit with a translation, and then the I guess, well, the yoga master would read it and then comment on it.
Mm-hmm.
And um, it was interesting too, because it's so like it's the openness of Hinduism to say it doesn't matter what the focal point is.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be the sound of Om, it could be Shiva, it could, it could be your shoe in the middle of the floor. As long as you're able to have that as a focal point,
Right.
um, because that's all you need. You need a focal point that ultimately you're going to focus entirely on and then release,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So next level is what?
Yeah, so that was the mind was mostly level, so 5 and 6, right? So five
Yeah.
was specifically for removing the senses so that you're alone with yourself, and then six was
Hmm.
all the mental problems that
Yeah.
exist when you are alone with yourself. And so then you have 7 and 8, which are um, progressively deepening your concentration.
Hmm.
Um, so what
Was
is
this when
seven?
the knower
Mhm.
drops from view?
So okay, so 7 is when you are brought to the point where it could stay right. You're thinking about a single, like an object, and you're
Hmm.
aware of only that object, right?
Okay, so the knower does drop from the view.
Yeah, the
You drop
knower
from the
drops
view.
from the view. So
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
dropping, and there's one mental concept, or maybe it's
Yeah. Yeah.
visual, right? Like you're
Yeah.
just thinking about one thing, and then the eighth, that's the climactic stage known as samadhi,
Hmm.
where the object vanishes and
As well.
you're just you're yeah, you're there.
You're there.
Yeah.
The knower is confronted with total being.
Formless, yeah, infinite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a quote that says, separated from all qualities, neither this nor that, without form, without a name. That's from the
Hmm.
Upanishads.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That'll be interesting because when we talk about, I mean, we don't have to jump there yet. When we talk about their theology, right? Naming God, not naming God. That it's interesting that he's sort of saying it is pure being in itself. How did they quote put it? The one you just quoted?
Yeah, separate from all qualities, neither this nor that,
There,
without form,
I think this,
without a name.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is it's interesting. Obviously, Buddhism keys off of the Hindu tradition,
Hmm.
but then there are differences, obviously. But the Zen form of enlightenment is ultimately one that can't even be discussed. So there
Mm-hmm.
is this the whole approach to sort of meditation gets carried over. I think with Jainism as well, but certainly with Buddhism, and then the Zen school, for the Zen monks, like once you've had it, if you once you've had it, enlightenment, you can't turn, and be like, hey, this is what it was like.
Right.
It's ineffable
I mean, I
in
feel
that.
like it's almost the same here. Like they're
Yeah,
talking about it, but they're talking about it in such a way that it's like separated without, not
yeah,
this nor that. It's like it's just how they're describing God essentially.
right,
Like it's not this, not
right,
this, not this, not what's left. And so it's like
right, right.
I don't know what that feels like to experience it, right?
Well, for C.S. Lewis, it was endless gray tapioca pudding.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this, though, is, and I think with the Zen tradition, and also with this one as well, is that you that I don't think it's meant to. I don't think it's meant to be described.
No, it's meant to
You
be
know?
experienced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, however, we're linguistic, verbal beings, ergo, what we're doing right now, talking. So we're sort of stuck on some of this, right? To be able to, like, how would we describe this? How would we,
How would you
explain
guide
it either
someone
to.
else to get to that point?
Exact,
Hmm.
exactly. So you're going to need all of those pieces. um, but it, and I think it even brings it up in the sort of, well, I forget what they called it, but the God theology section,
Hmm.
is that you're talking about something that's infinite, but you're using finite tools to describe it. Right there, you have a problem.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
I mean, not. I mean, not to keep sort of the Hinduism or the Hindu approach of acceptance of all approaches, as it were. Um, it's not to say that, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to go back to a Zen thing, but it's the finger pointing at the moon, right? It's not the moon. It's the finger pointing at the moon. That's
Mm.
what language is
Hmm.
ultimately.
Yeah.
So
Symbols.
but it's not to say that those are harmful or bad things, right? You know. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
that you're always keeping in mind it's a reservation. You're always keeping in mind like, yeah, this is not grasping it.
hmm
But I need them to do these other steps, and I need them to, to connect with others um, and ultimately have this realization.
yeah.
You know?
It's like words can only guide others to experiences that they've already had and have
Hmm.
observed and combined, right?
Yeah,
Like when you tell a
yeah,
story that moves someone, they've
yeah.
experienced something similar and are moved by it. But
Hmm.
if you're trying to describe an experience that nobody else has ever
Yeah,
attained, then
right.
you can't use words to get there,
Yeah.
right? Like you
It's
can't translate
de
that. You can only
describing
pave the path.
describing describing color to someone that's visually impaired.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's no background context for even the notion of it,
Yeah.
you know.
Or perspective to
Um,
someone who's blind. It's
yeah,
probably pretty
yeah,
difficult. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. Well, actually, the reverse would be true, right?
What's the
So,
reverse?
like the reverse would be something like uh, the seeing person not really understanding what the blind person's experience.
Yeah, yeah. How do
You
they
know, I mean,
navigate? Yeah, yeah.
like firsthand. You can
Mm-hmm.
close your eyes for 2 seconds and be like, "I guess this is what it's like," but it's not, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that in the experience of a blind person, they have enhanced oral hearing skills beyond ours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right.
Probably. Yeah.
So yeah, I've read that somewhere that the one sense is shut off, the other sense is more acute. It's almost like
Yeah.
I guess um, closest analog would be something like taking the trash out at night when it's dark. Your hearing is much more acute.
Mm-hmm.
You're hearing more of the world than you would if this you were taking the trash out at noon.
I would imagine that that physical sensations would be next because I think in the
Yeah.
hierarchy of data input from senses
Hmm.
to processing, it's like visual,
Yeah.
physical, audio,
Got it.
and then the others.
You go.
But
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. I
yeah.
can see that.
No, definitely
So
interesting.
So yeah, that will we can if you want, Christian, we can skip unless you wanted to talk about the stages of life.
We kind of went through that last time, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I will. Can I just say this? The what I like about the retirement phase
Mm-hmm.
is there's something, I had read this before, uh, like earlier when I was doing my Eastern turn.
Mm-hmm.
I really I don't know. Maybe it's the philosopher in me that thinks that there's always more to life than stuff. Okay, but I was drawn to the idea of um, in the retirement phase where the couple, you know, they're done with all of their worldly duties, as it were. Everything's taken care of.
Mm-hmm. They have grandkids now.
That yeah, exactly. Where their life is dedicated, um, not going to Cancun and not just doing world travel, but putting yourself like on a spiritual adventure. Like this is when I now have time to fully dedicate. Right, I'm not bogged down with the 9 to 5 and kids and excessive bills and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also too, you could also say a less mature or aware self.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hope. I can now devote myself to spirituality, and that was actually like wrapped into the culture. I don't know how much of it is today. Let's assume it is,
Mm-hmm.
or for a lot of people it is. But there was something I was like, that seems like the way to conclude your life, as opposed to like, man, let's just try to cram in as many cruises as we can before we kick the bucket. There's something about it that I guess I'm talking about sort of an aesthetic. There's an
Mm-hmm.
aesthetic that I'm really drawn to by that. It's like I now have time to actually focus on ultimate concerns. Really drawn to that, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like, I mean, the stages of life are through the stages of one life, but there are also, I mean, you see this pattern, right? With what's what is here within your
Hmm.
physical experience is also expanded beyond through your um, reincarnation history, essentially. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it talks about, being stuck in, like physical pleasures for a longer period of time.
Yeah,
So, like, I imagine that even if not everybody wants to focus on the spiritual when they're in their
sure.
retirement phase, right? Like, maybe that
Yeah.
shows you what part of their path they're on
Yes,
in their
exactly.
journey. But yeah, I also agree. I feel like it's I don't know, there's something about that that's like
I mean, I'm
really.
not I'm not against travel, but
Oh
that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
seems to be right. That seems to be you see like the retired couple, and then they're doing all these trying to I have a feeling of like, man, I've got limited time. What can I cram in here?
Hmm.
But what can I
And
cram in during what can I cram in during my layover before the flight, right?
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I
But
feel
there's
like there's a lot from travel that you can learn spiritually as well, right? Especially
true,
like gaining experience from other people, sharing
yeah.
what you've discovered, like, and then, in you still have a lot of downtime being retired, so you can have self time, even if it's not just in the
No,
next door
I don't think it's
forest.
an either. I
Yeah,
don't think it's an either or. I don't think
yeah,
it's an either or. But if it is a total focus on the bucket list, right?
right, right.
Um, that's where my criticism would be,
Hmm.
But no, you're absolutely right. Hey, here's a vacation idea. Go to India, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
go to Tibet. Anyway, I was drawn to that.
Hmm.
Stations of life. We talked about the cast for a bit. Is that right? Um,
Yeah,
oh,
I
the
think a
one
little bit.
thing,
Yeah. Hmm.
little bit. The one thing I did want to um, just comment there was that the caste structure is hierarchical, but it's also hierarchical in a spiritual sense.
Hmm.
And it was thought that through the various forms of reincarnation that you were moving up through the ladder of
Right.
those individuals.
Hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. I don't think I'd known that before. And then uh, um, also, it was another question I had about. I'm curious, and we just have to do some research. I'm curious about what the Brahmin caste looks like now,
Mm.
because the when we think about we don't have a caste system, but if we think about our socioeconomic levels, it's usually the ones that are on the top of the wealthiest, right?
Right. Hmm.
Um, and not necessarily the wisest, but the wealthiest.
Yeah.
And maybe you can throw in like, and then you have the oddity like an Elon Musk, where you've got a certain level of genius plus wealth, right?
Sure.
Um, but I was curious. I was like, is it really the case that I mean, the that the Brahmin class is made out of essentially like yoga masters?
Yeah. I mean, what it talks about, like
Because
what their
the
essentially like their rewards and punishments are, right? And
yeah,
theirs was not monetary, right?
yeah, yeah, it
Equally
was respect.
rewarded, but this does not mean they should receive the same pay.
But I was curious, like, is it the case that the Brahmin class? It sounds like the Brahmin caste is made up primarily of, if you will, gurus, spiritual leaders.
Yeah. Hmm.
You know,
Yeah. This
and I
says,
was
I mean,
curious.
neither wealth nor power interest Brahmin most.
Yeah,
If they do, they are
yeah.
wrongly
So maybe,
cast. Right? They
yeah,
should receive what they should the reward that they should receive is
is
respect from the
respect.
castes
Hmm.
that are still glued to those things.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
they should be the poorest,
yeah,
the
yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I
Physically,
I'd
like
be
yeah.
I'd be interested to see if that's like still like if that is still the case. In other words, if
Mm,
it's the case that your Indian businessman, who would be the administrator organizer caste, shows mm, true deference to
hmm.
your local gurus. You know,
I would imagine.
um,
I would imagine
yeah,
that maintained
yeah,
in their culture.
yeah. So, um, All right. Let's talk theology a bit because that was in the next section, and then we can probably segue. I only have 2 pages of light notes on the rest of the reading.
Hmm.
Possibly get into, or not get into the Upanishad. Um, so yeah, so the one set, what is, I don't even know what it's called. Sorry. Oh, it's the long one. Thou before whom all worlds recoil.
That's the
What would your,
short
what,
one.
no, let's, you can take the lead on that.
I don't remember. I didn't take specific notes.
Well, this
Oh,
was
yeah,
the
I
one.
remember this. We talked about
Go,
this a
go for
little
it.
bit, right? This was the difference between, this was like defining God, which we kind of already talked about a little bit. Not
Hmm.
this, not this. But then there was
Yeah.
also the two different ways of thinking about God. Um,
Hmm.
right? So there's the God without attributes, and then there's the God
Yep.
with attributes. So without
Yeah.
attributes
Yeah.
is like what you're trying to get to. That's like what is real in their
Right.
sense, right? But then the
Right.
God with attributes just allows you to think about it and talk about it more easily,
Yeah.
or experience it,
Yeah.
or praise or worship in the sense of a physical thing.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so so
I think
mhm,
the thing is, and I think the Upanishad uh, touches on this too. The Isha is
mhm,
so go a little meta here with the different texts that I've been reading, including ours. There's a real sense of don't get stuck on one thing, or be careful what you get stuck on.
yeah, mhm,
Okay? Maybe get stuck on meditation. Actually, not even that, because I think the Upanishad is careful about that. Um, the Isha, but there's this sense of don't get stuck. Be careful what you get stuck on, or be careful not to get stuck. Okay,
mhm,
and the obviously the God without attributes is, I don't know. I think it's what you just said. It's my sense too. Is that that is ultimately what Brahman is.
mhm,
Okay? You words will defy it. However, uh, to go back to something we said earlier, we are verbal beings. We
mhm,
communicate, and so we are reduced, or we're stuck in having to utilize words,
yeah,
right? Not only that, I think about the Bhakti yogi or Bhakti yoga, where they have a sort of a personal notion of God as a person, a being, a sort of a being that's separate from themselves, right?
yeah, mhm,
But even there, that's, let's say, let's say even though that metaphysic might not be accurate with the ultimate metaphysic of Brahman, we all are it. It's not a bad thing, right? Because if it's something that can lead you to it,
yeah,
then that path is okay. So I sort of feel the same thing as with words here,
mhm,
that don't get stuck on it in describing God as X, Y, and Z. However, um, they can be useful in leading you to the ultimate ground of being.
yeah,
With me,
yeah,
you
definitely.
know.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, the one
Ye-
thing you should get down if you didn't. Oh no, you were going to say something.
yeah, well, it's also interesting because I mean, I feel like words provide attributes, and so it's like
Hmm.
that, they have the Saguna Brahman, which is God with attributes, and then the
Yeah,
Nirguna Brahman, which is God without attributes. But
yeah,
Nirguna is like an attribute applied to Brahman, which is funny in a
yeah,
way, because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
meta. Um,
yeah.
yeah. Oh,
An
there's one other thing.
attributeless attribute,
Exactly.
as it were, as it were. The
Yes.
one thing you should get down, because this is really, this it's almost like a summary of Hinduism as I understand it, um, and of the notion of Brahman. It's on the left-hand column, and it's the chief. Yeah, I'm sorry, middle of that column. The chief attributes to be linked with the name of Brahman are Sat, Chit, Ananda.
Mm.
Being, awareness. Sometimes chi is also translated as consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and ananda is usually always just bliss. So being, consciousness, bliss. But that those the Sanskrit words sat chit ananda, those pop up in different either as solo words or together or
Mm-hmm.
two of the three in a lot of the different mantras.
Okay.
In fact, what yoga, yeah, yeah, yeah. Even in the one that even in the Pantanjali sutra that I sang to you
Mm-hmm.
has the cheat. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, the cheat, essentially the mind or consciousness.
Right, right.
Um, and I think it's like a good shorthand of sort of getting at a very general notion of Brahman. In other words, it's like, okay, fine, these are attributes, but they're so not vague, but they're so broad, they're so expansive, right?
Yeah, it's like,
It's not being limited, it's not consciousness limited, it's not bliss limited.
yeah.
It's you know,
Yeah,
um,
what is being, you know?
yeah, yeah,
It's not, it's like an attribute kind of, but it's also
very
like
good,
something common to so many different things. Like an
yeah,
awareness, right? Like you might think about, I don't know, it's like when you actually think about what being is, what awareness is. Bliss is, I feel like, is a little different, but definitely
yeah,
being and awareness, it's like when you actually try to understand and isolate those things from everything else,
yeah,
um, I feel like you kind of just you do think about this something that's kind of indescribable. Like when you break down
yeah,
awareness, it's like, well, you need to be aware about something, but then you're thinking about the
yeah,
world as like somewhat an aware-er and an
yeah,
aware-e
yeah,
kind of,
yeah,
and then it's
yeah,
like, well, that could be the self, but awareness is really
yeah,
that path. And it's like, well,
yeah,
what is that? Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm with you. I think what's also interesting too is that, well, in terms of nailing down being, that's slippery. And that's one of the oldest nuts to crack in
Mm-hmm.
the history of philosophy, um, because it's in front of us constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's happening now. You are being. This laptop is being. Everything around me is being. So it is one of the words that I feel like has a, well, I mean, a near infinite extension,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
but it is something that is all around us, even if it is just, it's something as simple as a cup of coffee, that is existing in some particular way. So existence is everywhere. The notion also of consciousness or awareness is consciousness also seems rather vast, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel like each of these has sort of like an infinite quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
definitely, definitely. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, um, so anyway, yeah,
They're like
those
fundamental.
are, yeah, fundamental. And also too, it's interesting. Like I remember growing up, so in the Westminster Confession, in the Reformed tradition, Dad had us memorize the shorter catechism, not the whole thing, but like as much of it as we could. And I still remember the first question and answer is, well, what is God?
Mm-hmm.
And it was, if I can remember, God is a God is infinite, eternal, unchangeable, and his being, goodness, justice, his being justice, goodness, and truth. So there's a definition for you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, so yeah, it's this one. I don't know, this one just seems so Hindu. So um, there's there's I don't know. It seems very expansive, you know,
Wait,
all
what
the
do you mean?
qualities.
Are
Well,
you
in
comparing
this,
contrasting?
well, in the sense of, well, to a degree. I mean, well, obviously the Christian God or the Judeo-Christian Islamic God
Mm-hmm.
is separate from creation.
Right, but that's not
Right?
even in your definition, in the catechism definition, right?
No, God is a. You're right. God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable, in his being, goodness, wisdom, and truth, something like that. No,
Yeah.
you're right.
Hmm.
You're right. You're
That
right.
feels very
No,
similar,
no, you're right.
right?
You're right. It does. It
Hmm.
does. I guess the only distinction would be that within the tradition, there's separateness. Not in that definition. I'll grant you that.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean,
right.
maybe
The
spirit seems separate from
Yeah,
physical reality. Like,
possibly,
yeah, maybe,
but
yeah.
well, but oh no, 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 spirit. Well, yeah, exactly. Spirit would be like just the contrast would be non-physical. It's not. It's not a. It's not a
Yeah.
physical. It's not like Zeus. You know,
Oh,
if
well,
he
yeah, I
is
guess that
physical.
is, yeah, that is kind of the same then, because,
Also, too, yeah, it wouldn't be like, or wouldn't we? It wouldn't be a. I think also the some of the ancient um Sumerian and Babylonian myths, so the gods are stars and moons and landscape, you know.
mm-hmm, yeah,
So there's a distinction too, because within the story of Genesis, God is not creation. God is the creator,
mm-hmm,
creating out there,
right,
speaking things into being, that are
mm-hmm,
not he himself. Um, so so yeah,
mm-hmm,
personal and transpersonal conceptions of God. And I guess we're just going to play with both of those throughout Hinduism, you know,
right, yep,
you know.
personal, transpersonal.
Also, too, I guess you could look at them as sort of like tools, like the personal slash um, God with attributes.
Mm-hmm,
You could look at as being like, hey, that's just an important tool for this particular individual, and if it's a helpful tool and they're not getting stuck on it, right,
mm-hmm,
to get them to full realization, then that's fine.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Uh, Reincarnation, transmigration. Are we good on that?
Um,
Although moksha, we're going to have to sort of. It sounds like there's some different takes on ultimately what happens when you finally reach the
moksha,
end.
the total release.
Yeah, that we'll have to sort of kick that around. Like, in other words, we are going through this continual wheel of incarnations with the idea of moving upward
Mm-hmm,
and having realization. Um, and then there's sort of a question about what happens at the end. Um, so you're released from the wheel um, of incarnation, reincarnation on repeat. Is that Well? I think this comes up with what happens in the end. If it's non-dualistic, then you merge with God. If you are dualistic, you are in God's company, I think Houston says.
mm,
Almost like the Christian notion, or the Judeo-Christian, well, I don't know about the Judeo, but the Christian and Islamic notion of the beatific vision. You are in the presence of God, yet separate.
sure. Mm-hmm,
So I think both of those, I think the, the tradition, the Hindu tradition, has both of those theological aspects. Meaning, in other words, different people speak to different theories.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
So, um, yeah, the only other thing I have to sort of comment on in the reading is the sort of, oh, that's where the dual non-dual came up in the when it talks about the world. But there's Maya and then Leela.
Yeah.
I like Leela. I actually like that theory. Sorry.
I do too. I mean, it sounds like one that
I-
you've told me before.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it also, I came up in a video recently that somebody was making on YouTube. I don't remember their name, but it was the video title was called "The Six Shapes of God,"
Hmm.
and one of them was talking about Leela, um,
Hmm.
which is a very interesting. So Leela is like this idea that um, God is like infinite, all powerful, but
Hmm.
in that sense became bored. because
Yeah.
what are you gonna do? You're just there. You have everything.
Right.
So in that boredom, the infinite, all-powerful being split itself into a million, billion, trillion different consciousnesses,
Yes.
and
Yes.
in order
Yes.
to play with itself and then play a
Yeah.
game like hide and seek to discover
Yeah.
itself through
Yeah.
a limited lens, a limited body.
Yeah.
I love the concept because if you can just apply it to so many aspects of life and be like, oh, this is just, I'm just trying to figure out, like, I'm trying to experience this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm here to experience this,
Yeah.
to understand something else about myself.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think also too is that in comparison to other theories of other religious theories about, God and humans and creation, they're heavy. They're really heavy. Like
Mm,
you have sinned.
mm-hmm,
You have done this egregious thing against the Creator. Um, there's ultimately sort of like penalties to pay, etc.
mm-hmm.
That's a heavy message, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and and what's interesting with this one is like I was actually going to tell you right or ask you right after you finished speaking. It's like, well, what would you do if you were a god, right? I mean, what would what what would how would you? I mean, you know, how would what what would you do? I was going to say do with your time. What would you do with your eternity? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and um, I don't know. If my own theory would be if I had to create, if I had to choose an approach, it would be more along the idea of play, of sort of like this you know um, I don't even know how to conceptualize it, but you know I as being am here.
Mm-hmm.
Now what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And um, and creating a game that's much more playful than a harrowing notion of eternal punishment or hell or
Right.
there's something psychologically uplifting about it. You know, um,
Yeah.
I'm engaged in a dance. I'm engaged in a song.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I am doing art. You know, as opposed to um, you miserable little things that can't measure up, and now you're going to be punished. Unless you know.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, just looking at it aesthetically,
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, well, I don't know, which painting would you choose?
Yeah, and it's like cooperation becomes a lot more organic, I feel like, than forced.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because it's just like,
Yes.
oh, being is just all of us, and we're all struggling
Hmm.
with the physical reality that we live in, and
Hmm.
it's like, oh, it's like help one another because you're
Yeah.
all being, you're all like the same essentially,
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
the core. But then, yeah, I don't know, if you have a different view, then it's like maybe you're not all the same, or maybe you're the same but
Yeah.
different, right? You focus
Yeah.
on the differences
Yeah. Yeah.
for, yeah, sin and punishment. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, no, I
It's
agree.
interesting. I was reading in the recently in the early church. This one historian makes a claim that the Orthodox view, what he doesn't call it the Orthodox view, he calls it the Proto-Orthodox view, which is the one we have now with the creeds, etc.,
Hmm.
was not even the dominant one. In other words, there were various forms of Christianity that were vying for, um, you know, predominance.
Hmm.
And the one was the Gnostic one, which I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with. And the Gnostic form ultimately ended up being determined heretical as
Right.
the proto-Orthodox gained in power and traction. But it's interesting, the Gnostic one, it doesn't deal with sin.
Hmm.
There's no original sin and that's primordial and then passed on to all future generations. It's ignorance.
Hmm.
Theirs was ignorance. It was ignorance. It was ignorance of what you really are. It was ignorance of um, uh, sort of, if you will, metaphysical and anthropological ignorance. And now, well, I don't need some of the weird stuff, but that was the core problem, not sin. Within
Right.
the early um, these early Christian traditions that were sort of vying for
Interesting.
position. So you've got like that. It's interesting when you think about the word religion. It's like, what's the problem,
Yeah.
right? The problem for the Orthodox tradition, which we have, you know, today for Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox, is sin, right?
Hmm.
What you have for this side Gnostic one, ignorance. What you have for Buddhism, it's desire. Desire is the problem,
Mm-hmm.
and you can wrap that up with self. So the more you desire, the more you're creating. And this is sort of a little bit parallel with, or I would say parallel more with Hinduism. The more you desire,
Yep.
the more suffering you will create because you can't
Hmm.
have it all, right? So it's interesting when you look at sort of, especially if you're playing with the idea of you're doing a little bit of like um, sort of like theological metaphysics about like sort of, you know, what kind of God do you have, and what's the problem?
Yeah.
It's interesting. You're going to find all of these, different reasons. It's not sin at all with the Buddhist tradition. With the Buddhist tradition, yes, there are rules.
Hmm.
There's morality, but the key issue is um, stuck on self, stuck on desires. Desire equals, desires ultimately equals suffering. How do I get over the suffering? I relinquish
Hmm.
the desires. How do I do that? Here are the steps. You know.
Yeah. No, it's
The
very different.
Judeo-Christian tradition one, Islamic one, it's at least but yeah, as they stand now, it's a rift between you and God due to some primordial sin. Not all. I don't think Jews and I'm not really sure. Well, we'll find out where Muslims are on original sin. I think there's
Hmm.
a uniquely Christian one, right? But
Yeah.
it
Yeah, that's
flavors
interesting.
things in a very different way, you know.
Hmm. I feel like this is slightly changing topic, but with the same vein. The idea of original sin is very interesting, and I feel like we
Hmm.
still kind of perpetuate it in non-religious culture.
Yeah,
Like, um, I don't know, just the idea of like being a white, like male person, right?
yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like society kind of attributes that to kind of an original sin of people of the past, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Who
Yeah,
enslaved others or who took power over women or
sure.
whatever, right? And it's just like it's almost like that even though that wasn't what people nowadays are doing, I mean some
Yeah,
people are, but whatever, the majority of people
right,
aren't
right.
perpetrating those things. They're still judged for them, which is
Sure.
interesting. It's
Totally.
like that's not
Totally.
necessarily a religious idea to blame
Hmm.
someone for their
Hmm.
ancestors.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, you're absolutely right. That's the language of the sins of the fathers, right?
Hmm.
You are guilty for the sins of the
Yeah.
fathers.
Yep. Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting too. It's actually this book, part of my medieval reading list. It just happened to be out here.
Hmm.
And it starts with looking at early Christianity before it gets into the Middle Ages. And so that's where they bring up some of these, what are now called heresies. But in the when he gets to Augustine, who sort of like is the first medieval theologian, he has a argument with Pelagius, and it was all about um, it was all about the interpretation of sin.
Hmm.
And Pelagius was like, there's no original sin. By the way, he also ended up being, well, actually, well, yeah, the full on Pelagianism was also anathematized as heretical.
Hmm.
But his theory was, he was like, no, there's no original sin that Adam and Eve did that is passed on, and therefore we're all incapable, right, of doing the right thing, being perfect.
Right.
His theory was that it is it's the environment. It's we mimic those around us, and those and a lot of people are self-interested and sinful and kill and lie and steal, etc. And so basically we're picking it up by osmosis,
Hmm.
not that it is part of our constitution.
Right. Interesting. So
And
if there
Augustine was
were,
way on the other side. What's
mhm.
that?
I was gonna say if there were an original sin by Adam and Eve, they're the ones cultivating the environment for their children,
There
and
you go.
so it's like, yeah, they would just pick it
Exactly.
up through
And
social
you have, and
means.
then you have, yeah, and then you have Cain and Abel if you want to
Yeah.
play out the narrative, right? And
Yeah.
then you have the rest of human history.
Hmm.
So it's and apparently actually that issue, the strong Augustinian issue, which was like, no, it's original sin. We are fundamentally flawed. Ergo, we need the grace of God. And then, however, Augustine plays up the importance of freedom, right? So it's not that you're so impaired that you can't choose or you can't accept the grace,
Hmm.
right? And then the grace is ultimately the enabler to uh, uh, for holiness, as it were, right?
Hmm.
And Pelagius's view was no, we're just mimicking, we're just we're picking up bad vibes essentially, set by bad examples. Um, and so they have this debate. Apparently, though, the council that resolved it is actually it's a middling position
Hmm.
between Augustine and Pelagius. So full-on Pelagianism was like out. So it's held on to original sin, but it held on to sort of the freedom, um, or the like I guess it would be like the image of God is still in me, even though it's suppressed a bit,
Hmm.
and that enables me to see the good. I can't pull myself up, by the bootstraps, but and I still need grace, but there's more in me than
Interesting.
I'm rot through and through.
Right.
So,
Right.
but
Hmm.
those images really appeal to me in terms of, um, you look at a particular religion. What's the theory of God? What's the theory of man? What's the problem? What's the solution? And it's interesting also, sort of like how that can play out psychologically,
Hmm.
right? So, the an emphasis on hell, you can see how that's going to play out psychologically, or an emphasis in the Buddhist tradition on um, the desire suffering matrix.
Hmm.
You're not flawed. You just it's choices you're making that create the problem.